where I was, did you hear that, machine? I'll say it again. Call the meeting to order and ask for approval of the agenda for the Council Strategy Committee meeting. Fred? Is that a motion?
Motion.
And a second?
Second.
Thanks. Any adds, subtracts? I did want to hear about the 2017 budget process.
It's tonight.
That's in tonight, fine. Okay, so nothing there. So anything else? So all in favour of adoption and opposed, that carries. Public participation seeing none, we'll move on to approval of minutes of the meeting of November 15th.
I have no changes.
I had no changes. Eileen?
Nothing.
I don't think you were even
I
in on
wasn't
this
here,
one,
so I can't.
you can't opine. Jim?
No,
No?
nothing
Okay.
at all, no.
So I'll take a motion and a second. Thanks. Any further commentary? All in favour of adoption and opposed? That carries. Business arising. There are none, I believe, but we'll just have a quick walk.
Well, it's all about Steve last time. And he's here.
Yeah.
Well, there was
Was there a decision?
fee bylaw thing, as well as the development application procedures.
That went through as recommendations to council, I
Yeah.
believe, and council acted on it.
Yeah.
Just to remind us all, this is just a committee of council. Okay, so we'll move on to unfinished business, and Steve, that's you. So the report that Steve's produced is on page 7. I don't propose that we go through it line by line. I would hope that we've all done it, but Steve, perhaps you can give us the salient points, the things that either we really must know or we may have missed, and then I'm sure we all have comments. I certainly have many. And perhaps we can knock it off that way. What do you say?
All right. Okay, well, this report is dealing with 4 topics, again from the terms of reference for the zoning bylaw review project. Short-term vacation rentals, marijuana dispensaries, storage of industrial equipment and heavy vehicles in residential areas primarily, and zoning over the surface of the ocean. So the interesting one really, well, I think they're all interesting, but short-term rentals is something that has gone on for years, very low-key in the past, and just been exponential growth over the last couple of years in many communities. Not so much Lions Bay. There's a few here that you can look up on
When you go to Airbnb
or
or
VRBO or whatever, you'll see
Something will come
half
up,
a dozen or 10, 11. In some areas, though, the rental housing stock for affordable housing, guest suites and things are being affected, and it's putting a squeeze on renters. I know in my community of Everton, that's the case. It's quite an issue there amongst the renters trying to find places to live. So what I did was I looked at a number of different options that are being pursued around southwestern BC in terms of zoning approaches to short-term rentals, and they range from sort of one extreme to the other, where there's a district of Seashell, it just says, yep, they're allowed. Other places, it's more of a, it's still in a, they haven't really dealt with them, maybe like this area here. It's not in the zoning bylaw. There may be some provisions for bed and breakfast, but the outright rental of a dwelling unit is not a permitted use. Options for creating site-specific zoning and temporary uses are, I haven't really seen anybody using the temporary use permit yet, although I think that's been put forward by some of the municipal lawyers as an option that might be good, and that's one that I'm partially recommending that we pursue here. The City of Vancouver, that's option 3, is where they have come up with an approach where they're allowing short-term rentals in the principal residence, but not in secondary suites and carriage houses.
What's the logic there?
Again, I think it's the housing market. It's displacing, there's a tendency to displace renters, I guess, with the short-term rentals. So they have consciously decided that the secondary suites were a form of affordable housing. That's how they were legalized. And I guess that's why they're saying that that should stay part of the housing stock for tenancies as opposed to overnight guests.
Yeah.
So shall I go through the whole report? Just the
I think
overview,
maybe
or-
we knock them off one by one.
Okay.
So the short-term rentals thing, and then each of the separate pieces,
Yeah.
so that it starts, so it stays current.
So what I did in this report is I did make some recommendations about what I would advise as a planning consultant for the recommended approach. And I think the temporary use permit approach is one that allows, especially in an area where there's no business licensing, because in some places business licenses are used to
Control it.
somewhat regulate. A temporary use permit can be issued for a period of up to 3 years, and it can be renewed once. And then after that first cycle, the property owner or proponent can then apply for a new permit, and the cycle of temporary permits can go on indefinitely. Conditions, and I've outlined a number of them that could be considerations attached to a temporary use permit, go much further beyond what can be regulated under zoning. And if a person operating a short-term rental is not being a good neighbor or allowing their guests to be disruptive, the permits can be, I'm not sure, have to check on the revoking of permits, but certainly non-renewal is just allowing a permit to lapse is one way to see the end of it, of any kind of temporary use. And there's no grandparenting, so it's not like a zoning. It doesn't the permit, again, I have to look to see whether the permit actually runs with the land.
Yeah.
It doesn't.
Yeah.
Okay.
To the licensee or
Yeah.
to the permittee.
Yeah.
Oh, that's good.
But
Because
certainly it doesn't convey any rights to any future purchaser after the permit expires.
Does it allow for inspection in terms of fire code compliance? In terms of I don't know what, but
I would think that could be a reasonable part of an evaluation process.
And perhaps
When someone was applying to have some confirmation that all the necessary code requirements are met.
That's probably going to be the most critical piece.
Safety.
Safety.
Yeah.
I wasn't thinking a long period of time. I was personally thinking more short term.
on the TUPs.
Yes.
Yeah.
But how do we enforce them? That would be a.
Well, that's always the thing, and yeah, I mean, I see the recommendation, and I like the idea, but it's the enforcement is my issue as well. And I presume that this gives us the ability to charge a fee, either as sort of an income tax or as a use of utilities type fee. But again, how do we know if the owner doesn't rent it in 6 years? Do we charge them
Well, if
differently?
you're doing to my knowledge, you'll be having like an application fee, and then that's it. And there may be a renewal fee. Now, whether there's any additional utilities fees that are payable, I'm not sure how you're working that now. Say with secondary suites, like, do you pay an additional fee for that? Yeah, so they'd be paying that.
What is it, a business license type of thing?
A temporary use permit?
Yeah.
No, it's a land use permit, but it has some aspects. It almost can function like a license, because it can be as short as 6 months or a year. I guess it's up to the council to determine. The music festival in Pemberton goes for 3 days, and they may have gotten a permit that was a couple of months to allow for setup and takedown. If you're doing a special event, because you can have temporary use permits for anything. 1 year would be probably a good sort of starting point. Then it becomes like a business license. The person renews it. There could be some review of their practice, and and then renewed for another year. And then if there's a comfort level, the council may decide that they don't want to do this every year and can extend the permit period.
Does each permit come to council?
Yes.
Oh,
Well, they can be there's some provision for it to be delegated, but they have to be advertised.
Yeah, it can be delegated. So you could choose to delegate to me, for example, and then the applicant, if they didn't like my decision, could appeal to council.
As approving officer or as CAO?
Just as an officer of the village. You can delegate to whoever you want. But I was going to say that if I remember correctly, I didn't think to look it up, but I believe the fee that we have established in the incoming fees bylaw that's going to take effect, assuming you adopt it tonight, take effect January 1st. I think the fee for temporary use permits was set at $1,000, and the renewal is maybe $600 or $750 or something like that.
Are there classifications of TUP? Or, can you say TUP, comma, short-term rental and other kinds, or is there only one application?
You can, as Steve mentioned, you can use them for a variety of different things. You know, if somebody wanted to have an event in the park, you could issue them a TUP for a 3-day weekend festival or something like that.
The permit itself would specify exactly what was permitted under the permit.
Yeah,
So
just shout it out. There's no.
what was the fee?
I think it's 1,000. Actually, well, should have it right here.
I mean, yeah, that may be getting a little bit more granular than we need at this stage of the game. But it seems to me that's about sort of the right number to allow somebody 3 plus 3 years worth of renting out their home.
Well, it's 1,000 plus 750 for a renewal application. So I think the recommendation was, you'd issue one for 1 year and then see how they go, and then give them a 1 year renewal, because you can only renew no longer than the initial term. And then after 2 years, then if everything's good, then you just give them a 3 year.
Ron?
Thank you, Mayor. I know this is a discussion piece, but I thought in terms of where we're all going, and this, Steve bless us all, and has done this independently, but I must say with a very positive bias. And I am wearing black on the top this afternoon. I'll be wearing all black tonight. But I believe option number 2, which is prohibit, probably more than everybody in this room has spent more time in the last 3 years around the world at Airbnbs. So I'm very familiar, whether it's in Australia, Hong Kong, New York, Toronto, etc., and I've just recently spent 2 trips downtown Vancouver. There is a loathing of Airbnb short-term rentals in places where they call it communities, not rental villages. And we open ourselves up to a variety of things like this. And this firm no, which is a universal no, takes care of that. In terms of the other pieces to this, the vast majority of our population is not going to participate in short-term rentals in the village, so the decision is not financially accretive to them in a meaningful way. What would be meaningful to them is if somebody went off the rails and it chalked back here or to the CAO. What I would also see here is that we have a very tiny staff. Do we really want them policing Airbnb type rental systems? Do we want them enforcing this kind of stuff? And as my colleagues have already mentioned, what about, do we get to go in? Do we find out that in fact the owner has been doing some home handyman electrical work and all the rest of this kind of stuff? I feel that for what might benefit we the corporate village is insignificant. And we the public relations village, in that the CAO gets to, pardon my reference, pick and choose who we're going to accept and that we're going to extend that largesse for up to 3 years, that's a pretty long commitment to a whole bunch of things here. So for me, and I know it's not a decision-making process, but I am giving you the dark side perspective.
Yeah, well, I guess, I mean, at the end of this, I was going to raise the point, I'll raise it now. What sort of public consultation do we engage in the entire zoning bylaw changes? Because I don't really have a sense of what the village wants.
Well, I think the plan is to, Steve's already been working on a draft of the bylaw, so that that can come to you for the January 10th meeting. Have a look-see, and then if you're good with putting it out to the public, then we would have a public information session, a public information meeting, like an
With
open house.
posters and
Yeah.
digest it.
Invite people to come and opine on the new zoning bylaw and the ideas that are, the draft, so that we get their feedback before we, start going down the path of readings.
But by that time, we would have decided whether we want to encourage
It's either
neutral
in or
or
out.
whatever. I mean, a place like Tofino, for example, exists
Hmm.
on short-term rentals. A place like Lions Bay is not Tofino. But where are we on that spectrum?
So-
There's plenty of people, I suspect, who have bought their houses, especially recently, with a view to renting out pieces of them in order to make ends meet.
So, a couple of comments that I would have are as follows. With respect to safety requirements, we're talking about people's principal residence. We're not talking about secondary suites. So presumably their principal residences have an occupancy permit, and we're not worrying about all kinds of funky electrical and weird stuff that's gone on.
Yeah, that's the fiction that we work on, because I suspect half the houses in Lions Bay,
Okay.
they actually got an occupancy permit.
The other thing is that as you reference, there's more and more people who are non-resident owners, and perhaps that will be a trend. I don't know. And it doesn't have to be an onerous process. It can be a very simple, straightforward. They come to council. If not to me, then straight to council. And they'd have an application form, fill in all the blanks. You can figure out what conditions are applicable, and they get their permit and they go away. I don't really see enforcement being an issue, just as it's not really an issue now, other than we're seeing a couple of issue properties where we've got some other things going on. But you want to have the ability, I think, if you're going to specifically allow these sorts of uses, to be able to pull that use. And you're not going to do that unless you have a problem, and then lo and behold, you've got your means of dealing with it. If you don't have something like this in place, then you're having to go after them under a land use or under a zoning bylaw that was probably a lot less detailed, doesn't have all these conditional uses or conditional restrictions attached to it, or you're trying to get them on a noise bylaw, which is always difficult, or something similar to
Yeah.
that.
So let me just take the temperature, just before we go too far down any one rabbit hole. So Ron, I think we know where you would stand.
Opposed entirely.
You would be opposed to short-term rentals in the village. Fred, there's just just
Right. I got a few comments on it. I don't have a hard position on it at this point, but using Steve's sentence out of analysis as option one, his question, but how business friendly should a residential zoning be? And I think that's one thing, regardless of what option we choose, we have to keep that in mind. How much do we want business operating in a residential zone? And to the option two, the negative to that for me is, or the positive to option two being a negative.
It's efficient.
Yes, thank you. Lions Bay isn't a destination like Tofino. I mean, who comes to Lions Bay for a holiday? Well, I'm sure there might be some, but I think we're in a different kettle of fish than Tofino.
we're not Tofino, no, that's for sure.
And the other thing I'm concerned about, say option three, Vancouver City's approach, where they think the principal residence should be used as an STR. I think, well, it ignores the resident owner benefit. In other words, you don't have on-site supervision. And I think whatever we would agree to, if we're gonna go in this route, if we want peace in the community, we better have the owner on site, or else we've got a management nonsense and we're gonna burn up all kinds of staff trying to deal with some rowdy short-term person. So I wouldn't wanna see you have anything where the resident didn't have part of the place.
Okay, let's just keep going around the table. Jim,
Well,
what do you say?
any places that I know of where there's been problems have always been around absentee owners. Okay, not an owner on site, but when we have an owner on site, we have a whole different dynamic, and we don't have a problem. So the only areas we have problems, and I'm lumping it all together, I'm saying rentals, okay? So thing is, only areas we do have problems with are absentee owners away, renting out rooms in the house to whoever comes along, and maybe it fits into Airbnb, I don't know, but it fits into something like that. And it's just, they've got 7 bedrooms in the house, and they're renting to 7 individual people, and there's no parking and none, you know, all this kind of stuff, and the neighbors are really annoyed. And that's where we have a problem. That's the only one I'm aware of that we have a problem with.
Is the distinction there, though, multi-unit rental or short-term rental?
Well, that's the part, that's the question I'm asking, because I mean, I can see people going down south for the winter and renting out their house to 3 or 4 people. And, you know, I've heard of some situations like that.
Yeah, my neighbours did.
Yeah, and so it's like, that's short-term rental.
Well, from what I can tell, they're very quiet. In my particular instance, the immediate next doors, they go down to Mexico,
Yeah.
and there's people, but they're very quiet.
I
They
just,
park on the property.
I don't know for sure how other municipalities deal with that definition and how
Yeah.
you, because I've got a neighbor across the street, he has university students that, you know, are always there, yeah. And at first I thought it was his kids, but it's not, his kids are all away. So it's cousins and people that are here doing school and stuff like that. And you know, it's a family thing, so I don't really want to stop that from happening. It sure screws around with parking, but other than that, you know, we don't have a problem with it. So I wonder if it's just, if we don't have an issue with it, can we sort of have it there but not, you know?
Well, yeah, so I mean, I want to touch on that, but let's just first hear from Eileen.
When we didn't live here full-time, for insurance purposes, we had to have someone living in the house. So that was not an option to us. We had to have.
So that was a long-term rental.
That was a long-term
You
rental.
can't insure your house without people being in it.
Yeah.
So yes, it was a long-term rental, but it was a necessary one. I've had a lot of complaints from people over in another part of the village that there's the log house is being rented out, and I think he gets $12,000 a week for the place. But the parking, the parties, he rents it out as basically a party
That's the
house.
one, yeah.
And the neighbors are just going crazy. And you've got like 10, 12 people there.
And you got nobody there on site. to
Nobody on
manage it.
site. He lives in California, and it says I live in California. So that's a serious problem, and I don't know whether we can enforce it.
Where's the log house?
Calvin Grove.
And whereabouts in Kelvin Grove?
As you're going up, just on the bend.
It's on the bend.
On the upper?
Oh,
or
yeah,
Yes.
on the top.
On the
It's
top,
up
top.
Just on the bend, on the
Yeah,
top?
yeah, there is, yeah.
Yeah.
So now,
You can
Steve,
check Craig, no, what is it, Airbnb, it's always advertised.
as a general consideration in bylaws, if it's not, is it always the case, if it's not specifically permitted, it is not permitted?
Correct.
Or, and that's how all bylaws are, including ours. So unless we say you can do it, you can't.
That's the way zoning bylaws work.
Okay.
Most zoning bylaws also have some uses that are permitted in all zones, but in each zone, there's usually a preamble in the permitted uses, a lead-in sentence that says, in the R1 zone, the following uses and no others are permitted, or land shall be used for the following purposes only.
So if we just glossed over this and didn't address short-term rentals, what tools would we have to address egregious misuse?
Well, I would recommend, in any event, if we stepped aside from short-term rentals, I would still be recommending that in your zoning bylaw, you have a one line that says that you have designated either all or parts of the municipality for the issuance of temporary use permits, because there is you don't have to issue any, but it sets you up in a situation where if something comes along and it may be the tool you need, you have it there ready to go. And and you don't need to say anything about short-term rentals if you have the temporary use permit.
But if we get somebody abusing the situation, does that mean everybody else now needs to get a permit, or just that person? Is that not singling them out?
If you have a problem situation with a party house, not uncommon, and enforcement is usually complaint based in almost all places. The only thing that's not complaint based is usually building inspection. So on things like land use matters or noise or whatever, it's unsightly premises. It's if there's a complaint come in a formal complaint, usually there's a policy for written complaints or a form to be filled out, whatever. Then that can start the process. And if there's 10 short-term rental operations in Lions Bay and there's one that's really a problem, that's the one that you don't have to go after all of them and shut them all down. You can seek either compliance with zoning or having a chat with someone and
But what actually is the stick we have? Because the zoning allows it, but the zoning allows it.
Right now, the zoning, I would say, does not allow it.
No, I'm saying, if yes, that's true. So everybody even with the B&B is not compliant right now.
That's what would be my opinion, yeah.
Mm.
So if you leave it as is, if you don't mention short-term rentals, they're not a permitted use. I think what the option I put forward was to specifically prohibit them, so you can point to a clause in your bylaw that says these are not permitted. This is how we define a short-term rental, and they're not allowed. Rather than sort of a little bit more, less clear.
So it's a trapdoor enforcement clause, basically. If you're going to zero in on
if you really want to turn your attention to short-term rentals and you specifically want to try to keep them out of Lions Bay, then you put up a sign in your bylaw that essentially says, not allowed here.
By putting it into our bylaws, with the secondary suites, we require inspections and before you can have a secondary suite. Are we being remiss if we're not demanding an inspection before we're giving a permit for you to rent out your house?
Well, I would hope that would be one of
Legally.
the conditions of the permit.
Yeah.
But so I mean that sort of points out the whole enforcement thing. Peter, remind us of the numbers of secondary suites. I think 30 returns, 30 people have fessed up to having a secondary suite.
No, 47.
47, of which we've inspected all of them, more or less.
And what was the number conforming again?
Something like that.
Yeah.
20 or
Yeah.
27. Something.
And I know, being one of the 47, the conforming part is quite onerous. You've got to have fire stops, you've got to have connected CO detected. It's not insubstantial. Fire doors, all that stuff.
That's to separate one living space
Yeah.
or dwelling unit from another.
Yeah.
As
Yeah, I mean,
opposed to just the main house.
Yeah, no, that's to separate the secondary suite from the rest of the house. So I can quite see that people wouldn't be compliant. But the point is, and I know, there's a heck of a lot more than 47 secondary suites in Lions Bay. So I'm actually trying to understand what is the most pragmatic way to do this. Okay, so I'm hearing around the table that we probably would think that the ethos of the village is no short-term rentals. The tool that you recommend to control, so there's going to be a dozen people who rely on having short-term rentals. They need it to make ends meet.
So if they're below the radar, they're below the radar.
And if they start causing erection, we have
Above the radar
we have a
clause.
permit.
That's actually I've dealt over the years with dog kennel operators who operate without zoning, and that's the best enforcement because they know that if they get a complaint that they're on the road to be shutting down.
Under what provision though? How they?
Well, if you're
Oh, under the
operating,
zoning.
yeah, under the zoning, if you're operating contrary to zoning, you've got to have happy neighbors. Because
So-
it's one phone call that sets the wheels in motion.
Yeah. And there's a black and white clause that says you're not allowed to be doing this.
But that goes
No.
back to, you've got a resident owner there on the property. That's what that goes back to. And I think the only time we have problems is when we have short-term rental, and we've got people who are renting the whole house out
Well,
to 12 people a week.
Jim, in theory, I would agree, but to show you that I can take black off and wear yellow for a minute too, I mean, on my street is the longest in the village, I think. On my street, there's somebody who's got a house in Hawaii, one in Hong Kong, and one in Lions Bay, completing the troika. And while he's doing a month's worth of work in his place in Hawaii, he Airbnbs his place out. I think he got 20 grand for his place, of which 10 grand was paid by a lovely European couple who wanted to participate in the Grand Fondo. So he wasn't there, but they were very responsible people. So, I mean, I think that, I mean, certainly when Mary and I do the rentals, I think we're responsible too, but, you know, I think ultimately, it goes back to the top of the house of the community. I mean, I think we're gonna have a bit of a push to get our community to buy into duplexes and stuff like that. I mean, because up until recently, it was just taboo.
Yeah, I mean, there's multiple distinctions here we must be aware of. I mean, everybody's within their rights to rent out the house. On a
Long-term rental.
long-term basis, whatever long-term is defined. Peter?
Generally defined as more than 28 days. But with respect to setting us up by saying no short-term rentals, and then with the sort of wink, wink, nudge, nudge,
Yeah, I don't think
we're not
that's a good
going to
policy.
enforce. I don't like that because
don't
it's
like it
like,
either.
you know, that puts it on us to enforce or not enforce, and
Unenforceably
you know,
enforce it.
bylaw provisions that you have no intention of enforcing unless, you know, you get the bad apple. And I don't think that's really the best way to write bylaws.
It's not.
So if you're saying that we don't really want them, but for the most part, we're okay with the ones that are well behaved, and we want to be able to kick out the ones that aren't, then I think the TUP is the best way to go, because you're saying basically we'll ensure that the ones who are well behaved are meeting all of our conditions.
So do allow
and
it.
if they don't, then we've got a means to say, you know, you're bad, you get kicked out of school
But-
after a year.
How do you feel about lowering to a 6 months?
I thought, excuse me, sorry. I thought they could only be 1 year, 2 year, or 3. Is that not right?
No, I think it's
Anytime
not
under
open
3?
now. It's up to 3 years.
Up
It just
to, okay.
it's yeah, all I see is a 3-year time, like a maximum.
Yeah,
no
okay.
minimum.
I guess
It can be revoked at any time, I presume.
I
for-
think that
Not
part's a little more,
arbitrarily.
No, but not meeting the terms of the permit.
Yeah, and you can require security as well. So you
Uh,
can require some bonding.
Okay, let's. I think we've got enough on this. Everybody, we're not going to decide here and now. I think you get a sense, at least, of where we, you know, we're only
Right.
representing the will of the community.
Okay, so the thing is, so thinking forward to January, Steve's putting together a draft of the bylaw. So
Yeah.
he needs to put something in as a draft. What I would anticipate is that we have a draft, and then we have several different, you know, we're looking at 3 or 4 today, that we looked at 3 or 4 last time. So we would have a draft bylaw, and then at the public open house, we'd have, you know, sort of, you know, section 6 is to do with this.
And you have the
we'd have,
options,
you know,
and here are the implications.
Here are the options that we looked at. What are your thoughts, you know, on all the options?
Yeah.
So that they understand where the, you know, because they don't need to, you know, we don't need to get feedback about the definitions or, you know, technical
No, and
things.
and
It's
how
just
long the
these-
permit is and all that stuff.
Yeah.
It's
but-
more. I'm thinking, you know, the posters that we have on the easels. What's changed is short-term. There were no short-term rentals 3 years ago, whatever the number is. Now there are. What are we going to do about it?
Well, they probably existed in the day, back in the day, like Steve
Yeah.
suggests. You know, they're just, you know, in a classified ad.
I guess you put them in
in
a
a
classified.
newspaper.
Yeah.
Whereas now they're very easy to
Yeah,
find.
there's a
on the
business model
internet.
around them. I know plenty of people whose houses are financed by the VBRO rentals.
So, Carl, I don't want to have the last word in this, and I hope I'm not, but I mean, to bring back the last thing on this, I'm looking at our poster over here about priorities. And, you know, using staff time to facilitate short-term rentals is the last thing I want staff to spend 5 minutes doing.
Well, I'm also very worried about, how do you know? If
And
people are going to, who's going to come in for a permit?
Which is a different issue. And the other piece too is that, low that I would ever say that whatever Vancouver is trying to do, where you're doing the minimum month rental more or less, somehow that facilitates, let's say, the firemen of our village who, you know, if they can rent a house long-term and then do as they've done in the past year, that kind of thing, versus that house is no longer in the pool because financially it's a better deal for them to go short-term rental. And,
I think you can count the difference on the fingers of one hand.
The core piece for me is that I hate government getting involved in not such a clear-cut thing here.
Yeah, okay, so you guys sorted it out.
Well, I mean, I get the both of you guys. I mean, again, to be very black, and I don't want to have the last word, this is very positively written. I don't see a lot of positive spin to this. I mean, I get the money to the owner, I get everything's fine, kumbaya, let's move on. I get Peter's point, he doesn't want to get stuck with having to deal with a rotten apple.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, what has changed is that this now exists, and what are we going to do about it? And I'm hearing you say that we should explicitly allow it under permit. We know from the secondary suite situation that maybe a third of people will go through the process.
Well, I think that if there's, sorry to jump in.
No, go ahead.
I think that if there's not that many that do this, you know, from looking on the internet right now.
Yeah, that's very easy to tell.
That if we provide them with a positive means of simply, here's how you can do it legally, and I think that most, if not all, would apply to do that. And
we certainly know who they are, and we can say, we
It's
see
not
your
hard
ad.
to- it's not hard to suss out.
We don't see
so-
your permit. So some people will apply and their parking situation will not be commensurate with allowing it, and then they get turned
The
down. for a
parking
permit.
situation would be part of the conditions upon
Yeah,
which the
and if they can't
permit is
meet those?
granted. You definitely want to check that and make sure that there's no other issues.
I think that the idea of using a temporary use permit is probably the best way to go, and you've got a tool for enforcement if you need it. And we don't have enough information to base a hard case on. So the reality is, based on what we know about the problems we've had in the past, is the only issue that I'm aware of is the fact that when there's no owner, you got a problem. And so temporary use permit will solve that.
Yeah, but that's anecdotal. I mean,
Yeah.
I've rented 2 houses in the village. The owner was very far away. Hopefully there was no issue there. So whether the owner's there or not, I think the distinction is short term. And do we include B&B, which is in the main house? And do we allow short term of the secondary suite? Or carriage house, which I believe that we're sort of considering whether to allow carriage houses in our new zoning, as opposed to subdivision and whatnot. So, you know, there's quite a few combinations here that we need to consider.
The recommendation is to prohibit short-term rental of secondary suites,
Yeah.
because you don't want to.
Do we really need a market for long-term rental accommodation for people? I know some of our firefighters struggle, but there's only 30 of them.
Well, it strikes to me, sort of summarizing the whole thing, that Peter's probably got the better idea here, that Steve go out, make his proposals and everything here with the options and everything, and have our public meeting beforehand where we can get direct feedback from the people at a public meeting, like, do you want to go down one of these avenues or don't you? And then we're not guessing.
Yeah, well, I mean, you got to write something as a first draft, but then you specifically have, these are all the options for this section.
Well, I think we can probably discard some of these options straight away. So, you know, the Vancouver model, for example, I don't know how much rental housing we need to provide in Lions Bay.
Well, I think that there's always going to be a certain percentage that people are going to need to do something, or we need it for the firemen, or whatever the case is, you know. And I think the only problems that I'm looking to solve are the ones around these places that have 12 rooms in them, they rent them out to 12 different people all day
That's
long.
long-term.
Yeah, that wouldn't, yeah, but the thing is, maybe not, it's all short-term rental, they come and they go. The ones that are causing the complaints in Kelvin Grove are that, this one that Eileen's talking about, that's what it is. There's short-term rental, and there's high turnover, and there's no parking, and there's all sorts of problems, there's an absentee owner, and he doesn't care. And those are the ones that are gonna cause the problem, so
Okay, so what I'm
you've
gonna
gotta
say.
target that, that's it.
Pull this together, Carl.
Yeah, I don't really have a good sense of where even just the five of us want to go with this, let alone as the representatives of the village. But I think the recommendation from staff is a good one. That seems to be the consensus wisdom. Not putting words in your mouth, but that seems to be the best of both worlds. Allow it. Especially for the VBRO Airbnb model, we know exactly who those are, down to the individual units, and we can say, where's your permit? I would like to hear how we bring in B&Bs into that, if we bring in B&Bs.
I think the distinction between a B&B and a short-term rental is pretty much gone. I don't, there was like I've been at B&Bs as a customer where you don't get breakfast. That's just something that's not policed anymore.
That's
So
completely
the only
arbitrary,
difference-
yeah.
And a B&B typically does have a residency requirement as well. All the zoning bylaws that allow for B&Bs all say it's operated by a resident of the parcel.
Yeah.
And but otherwise, like the distinction of
But can you merge those together in terms of short-term paid accommodation?
Yeah, I think it's. I don't, like I say, I don't think there's a distinction now.
Yeah, I want to be very wary of any sort of corporate interference in people's use of their home. The only things that we need to be concerned about is where their use impinges on others' enjoyment of their home. And that's pretty much parking and noise. And if by doing the recommendation, we can address that somewhat quickly, rather than over the course of a 6-month enforcement hearing, why not? The B&Bs are also fairly easy to find because they're also advertised on the internet. Maybe not necessarily VBRO Airbnb, but they're findable. And you only have to look at a Google map of Lions Bay. The B&Bs are there. They're.
My question gets back to how do we enforce it? Okay, they're bad, we don't give them a license.
We'll only know they're bad afterwards.
After they have a license,
Yeah.
and then we won't renew their license.
Well, no, we
That's
have
not
means
gonna
under
stop
the
them.
license to enforce as well.
Well, I think that we probably would want to double check what our ability is to revoke a permit.
Well, you can certainly give an injunction to say start behaving immediately, as in the next minute.
I think you'd want to have a warning process in any event. And
Yeah, I mean, if somebody's setting off firecrackers and making fires in the front yard, that's a police matter, presumably. Yeah. Okay. Let's hope that gives you enough to chew on.
Well,
What is it that you think you heard?
Well, one thing that I heard that I want to just comment and maybe correct. With temporary use permits, you don't actually need to specify that in the bylaw that you're going to use temporary permits for short-term rentals. You can just choose to do that when you get an application. You can't issue a temporary permit unless you designate areas within the municipality where they can be issued. So in many cases, the entire jurisdiction, so you've left yourself the maximum, you say the entire area within the village of Lions Bay is designated as a temporary use permit area, something like
For
that.
short-term rentals
No,
or everything?
period.
just for any,
Period.
Okay, so that's a technicality, really.
Well,
so-
except you're actually not in any way expressly permitting short-term rentals. They're still prohibited unless a temporary permit is obtained. Because a temporary permit can, and what it is used for is to allow on a temporary basis a use that is not otherwise permitted under the zoning bylaw.
Okay, that's a technicality that goes way over my head. So,
Okay.
so it's forbidden, but it's allowed.
You
I don't like that
you
either.
can give an exception.
Well, you've got a permit
Yeah.
situation, you've got a control now.
So that sounds like it is allowed. if you get a permit.
If you get a
If you get a
permit,
permit.
but you
So-
can't, it's not like a building permit though, you don't have a right to get it.
Okay, there is a slight distinction there.
There's a big distinction.
So if somebody's running an unpermitted B&B slash Airbnb, that's prohibited.
Yes,
So it's not a complaint-based thing. We don't make the bad egg get the permit. Everybody has to get a permit if they want to do it. An exception permit.
yes.
But how would they know they would need one if there's nothing specifically linking
We
the
call them.
TUP?
We
Well,
send them a
yeah, so
letter.
usually it'd be if there's a complaint.
So how would,
Oh, we send them a letter.
Then you would say, you can either shut down or you can apply for a permit. That's your option.
but how would somebody know to apply to a permit unless they set it up illegally and then got the complaint?
In many cases, when people are contemplating using some kind of use on their property other than just pure residential, they'll check with their local town hall.
In Lions Bay. Yeah.
Maybe you don't know VON 2EO.
No, I know, I come from an area too where the compliance is very low, but people are aware, and then they're also aware of the local government's enforcement policies or aversion to enforcement, and just go ahead and do it anyway.
Well, there's other.
So
other
people will
tools.
check,
Yeah.
find they can't do it, and then make a decision and weigh the odds and the risks and do it or not.
I mean, if it's allowed under a permit situation, temporary permit situation only, then we've got to control.
But what
I think you do.
ultimately is the control? That's what I keep trying
The
to
big
get.
hammer?
Yeah, but what is the big hammer? They don't get a permit, they won't get a permit, or we revoke their permit. What can we do? Anything?
Well, the big hammer is your zoning bylaw. That's the big hammer. And right now, you don't have to do anything. You leave it's not a permitted use, short-term rentals.
But it's happening anyway.
And what's
Yeah.
the enforcement like?
Well,
What-
you would first of all, like with any bylaw enforcement, you try to work with someone to get voluntary compliance.
Yes.
If that failed, because if you've got a noisy, and this is on Sunshine Coast, we went through all this discussion, same thing, California even, not the same person, but same thing, party house, and finally it got to the point where the person acted, the problem went away, all was good. It was back to everything kind of under the radar, and we never changed any bylaws there. In this case, you're, if that doesn't work, if you can't work with somebody to at least get the major concerns addressed, then you go to court and you get an injunction. And then if
That's
someone does not,
where Ron's we don't have that kind of resource.
Or try it this way. Yeah, we do the court proceedings. 6 months later, they keep on generating the revenue. And then, I guess, maybe you're right. We'll just stop and then we, take everybody out for a month. The court drops and then we'll do it again. I mean,
Yeah.
I keep going back to this. This is not really
Well,
where it wants to go.
That's why, in my opinion, you're better off to say, here's our policy. Here's what we allow. Here's what we don't allow. Here's how you can do it legally. And if you don't do it this way, then you better not do it. Otherwise, we're going to shut you down.
We don't have any resource to come after you.
And we've been so successful with secondary suites after 5 years.
Yeah.
And there's
Well-
a far better
Well,
deal.
there is actually an explicit way to know who's doing short-term rentals, whereas secondary
It's-
suites we don't.
Yeah, you're
It's
right.
much easier, and it's not as many
Well,
people.
I
but
mean,
think-
as you would guess, that once, depending on how draconian governments get, then suddenly we become all friends, neighbors, relatives, my crazy Uncle Harry. Oh, you've got your niece in California or wherever it is. I mean, you go to a secondary market, it's like the stock market. That's why go to the big board when you go to the over-the-counter?
Yeah.
do we have a penalty in the fees bylaw if somebody is non-compliant with the zoning bylaw?
Sorry, say it again?
Is there, in the fees bylaw, is there a penalty identified if somebody?
A zoning violation?
Outside of the
Yeah.
zoning, yeah.
I believe it's not in your fee bylaw tells people how much it costs for a service or a permit.
Okay, but is there anything we have written that would have a penalty for non-compliance?
What would have to be built in?
Well, we would have to, I mean, if we were gonna do that, we'd put in provisions in our bylaw, notice enforcement bylaw. So we would make it
You'd get a ticket.
enforceable, we could make it enforceable under either the offense act, you know, you go to court or whatever, or you can do, we'll write you a ticket, maximum $500 per offense. So every day that they're non-compliant with their conditions, you can write them a $500 ticket at the most, or you can write it
So they,
anywhere
they
between.
need a bylaw to support that.
And then-
We already have a bylaw, we
Just-
just do an amendment to add this,
Well, you
There you
probably
go.
have not permitted use as one of the offenses, that
Yeah,
would already
yeah.
be there,
yeah,
so.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
But for the
Probably
amount of
already.
money people are raking in by these Airbnbs, $500 a day is the cost of doing business, isn't it?
No, I don't think, no.
I think
Well,
that
that's a-
would be,
That's a meaningful number.
Yeah.
on a daily basis, that would be meaningful.
It's a number they would feel, yeah.
But we would not be going up there. We know which individual who works for the village would go up there with the ticket book and hand over the ticket. There is nobody.
Okay,
We don't have the means to enforce it.
We're not,
We don't have to go up there with a ticket book under the bylaw, notice enforcement bylaw, we can mail it to them.
Okay, who's going to put it in the mail then?
We have.
we're not,
It just
But we're-
depends on what kind of an issue it is with the neighbors. You
But
know,
we're
if
not-
it's a trivial thing, you know, you have to weigh the, you know, the aggravation. If you've got a really significant problem in a neighborhood that needs to be addressed, at some point you have to decide, like, you
But we're not-
gotta bite the bullet.
we're not in a situation of being policing. What we're doing is we're responding to complaints
Mm-hmm.
and saying that this is not allowed because there's no permit for it. And therefore.
And there's no complaints.
Yeah, if there's no, but if there's no
There's no
complaint,
official complaints.
but if there's no, well, no, if there is no complaints, then we've got another issue. But in cases that I know of, we've got complaints.
But right now they're breaking the law and they're not getting the $500 a day ticket.
We do.
Yeah, true.
I'm gonna pull this together in a couple of minutes.
Uh,
Try. I mean, we can re-poll and go.
And it
around.
seems to me we have two real choices:
Yes.
allow or status quo. The rest,
Oh, I thought the two choices were prohibit or status
Prohibit,
quo.
well,
It's currently
yeah,
prohibited.
Status quo, it's
yeah,
prohibited.
Okay.
yeah. So it's status quo is currently as it is now. There are apparently 14 people who are doing a non-allowed use, plus a few B&Bs, at least 5, I think. I see them spotted around.
So we just hold the line, or either that, or we allow under use permits, temporary use permits.
What's changed is the availability of Airbnb and VBRO. That was not contemplated when we wrote our zoning bylaw. So now do we acknowledge that by now providing a mechanism to license your thing? And essentially, we don't need the temporary use permit for any enforcement that we don't already have. We can enforce, to the extent we do enforce, we can do it today.
We could amend the penalty bylaw right now.
Well, maximum 500, that's provincial, but,
Okay, well,
That's not provincial, it's local.
so,
okay, oh, can we go higher?
No. Oh, well, it's a provincially set maximum, sorry.
So it is provincial?
Yes, that's what you meant, sorry. It's our local bylaw, but
You know,
yes, that's
I think-
a limit.
I think, again, through the mayor to my colleagues, is this the pitched battle we want to fight in front of our residents at a big town hall with all this stuff, given what we know are the bigger issues here?
Well, no, is the obvious answer to that. The only thing is that this was not on the radar before.
Fair enough.
But how far off on the radar is it? I would suggest status quo is good.
Yeah, I was going to comment on that myself, just that if you find, you've got a menu, you've got there's gonna be more options, obviously, but I tried to give you the spectrum of options from wide open to shut the door and a few in between, right?
Yep.
And I think that, like, I'm an advocate of temporary use permits, just generally speaking.
I can see that, man. This is a PhD thesis.
But,
Well,
but I think that what you've got is like the status quo. I'm hearing that pretty strongly, and if there's a need to deal more explicitly with short-term rentals, and you've got other options. That you
Well,
can
let's put the
pursue.
TUCs in the new zoning bylaw. Anyway,
But we could also do this, pardon, through the mayor, we could do this the reverse way. you know, rather than building the perfect model here, we could do this the reverse way. Go the status quo, which fits for 99% of the village, and we're all covered here. If you're in disagreement, come to the town hall. Let's get a number of what we're talking about.
See how many
all the
people
rest
feel
of this
vehemently
stuff.
about it.
And how many, I mean, quite frankly, I mean, you know, the infrastructure borrowing and, you know, a new counselor, and, I mean, those are sexy topics. I mean.
Yeah, I think that's right. So I
And
think,
so-
Steve, that's, let's leave it as it is, put in TUCs, and we will ask in the public consultation saying, how many people see short-term rentals as a coming
Well,
issue?
no, you summarize it. That would be my view as well too, not that I'm.
I am seeing nods around the table on that. Okay, this is not the last time we'll talk about this, I'm sure, but I think that's probably enough to be going on for now. So let's move on to marijuana dispensaries. So this is a quick one, and I see the recommendation, easy stuff, right?
Yeah, no.
My only question was, what about the production facility? You say retailer, storefront retailer.
That's, it's
He's
under,
doing his long-term rental house that he's got.
I mean, this legislation is changing by the minute, isn't it?
yeah.
Is that federally regulated?
Yes.
I think they're trying to do that.
So, for example, just so council knows, Bowen is encouraging production facilities. There's security requirements around it. There's all, you know, so you don't get ripped off. But it will, if it is not already, be legal. And Bowen, for example, sees this as a good commercial opportunity, tax opportunity.
Some areas have, yes, definitely.
Stephen, could we put in manufacturing and have somebody challenge us if they decide to put a plant in our neighborhood? I'm thinking of your B. I mean, it's your line of work. I'm just, you know,
Well,
should they ever tell us they're manufacturing?
as far as production goes, my understanding of where the federal government is going with all this is that they're kind of combining the last two sets of regulations, so that the more recent marijuana legislation did away with the individual person growing maybe a maximum number of plants, but in their backyard or in their home or greenhouse or whatever, but for their own use. And there was quite a backlash on that because of the perceived costs of going through a more industrialized system of production. And where it stands at the moment, I gotta say, I honestly don't know. It's been a moving target. At Sunshine Coast, we were involved heavily for about 3 years, and we finally just stepped back and said, once the federal government has sorted this out, we'll see what the parameters are. And that's actually what we're doing here with this one, is the lawyers have said the one thing that's clear out of all this cannabis regulation is that the storefront retail, which is going on rampantly in some areas, is not legal. It is in contravention of federal law. And that's the easiest part of this, and that was one of the concerns here, was
So
that
now, how did Vancouver shut down the ones that they've just shut down?
injunction.
But was it under their bylaw, or they don't
Yeah,
get to enforce federal law?
Well, their bylaw only allows them to give tickets. They're not
So
allowed to go to court.
people are gathering tickets like Christmas cards.
They're very proud of it.
And they're saying, good, we hardly wait to go to court.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think you're in a no-win here, Steve. Yeah, what you-
Well, we have to wait and see. But
So this would just be a
this is-
stopgap measure.
Well, until we don't know.
Yeah.
What about, could we just add a clause C that prohibits production facilities?
Yeah, so
Or-
on
or-
B,
Or would that be, I mean,
Unless that put us afoul of future federal law, I wouldn't want to be. Because I'm not talking about illegal
I'll look into
facilities,
that.
I'm talking about legal
Uh,
facilities.
Steve,
I'll
look
just
at-
spend some, maybe a couple hours at most looking
Yeah.
into it, because it's, it's so difficult to even be able to contact somebody in the federal government in Health Canada or whichever agency it was, to try to get a response as to what you can do.
Maybe I can just phone Sarah Dubinsky and ask her.
Okay.
Maybe that would be quickest.
Okay.
I mean, if we put in even just the storefront thing, we're not doing anything ultra vires or $250,000 a day fine each because we've contravened federal law.
But I'm pretty sure you can prohibit, as because the issue, the thing is, it was such a moving target, the federal regulations, that was the issue. The province said that marijuana production was a farm use in the agricultural land reserve. So that was a change, that places where they have agricultural land reserve, then you could not prohibit marijuana production in the ALR.
Thanks a
We
lot.
don't have that
Yeah.
problem.
You don't.
Thanks for that.
So if we prohibited farm uses, would that do the trick? If it's a farm use?
Well, you want to prohibit marijuana production.
So that we can catch it all. in
By the way, where
Can't
do
think
we
what the
actually
answer is.
prohibit honey production?
The honey production?
Yeah.
What?
People don't produce it, the bees do.
Sorry, read.
Where do we prohibit honey production? Or do we?
I don't know if you do, other than
I think a number of years.
agriculture.
We looked at that honey thing
Why
that
wouldn't
guy
we?
was doing his hives
Bear
down.
attractant.
Wasn't that the same as the chickens and all that kind of stuff? Where
Yeah,
the
same
people
reason,
have
yeah.
the same issue? Yeah.
Well, chickens attract coyotes. Maybe it's under the dog bylaw,
You may.
animals
I'm not
bylaw.
sure.
You know, I think I remember I had Brenda talking, doing some small project on some of this stuff. So I mean, we excluded stuff like shooting guns in the village, live chickens, no horses on your property. It was a real Diet Coke kind of thing, and I vaguely kind of remember the bees were.
Well, I made an inquiry because the kids had some project, and you can keep bees if you have an electric fence. Who inspects your electric fence is, of course, unknown. A bear-proof electric fence. It's going to be a pretty hefty fence, obviously. But I guess at this stage of the game is, do we even... We can't cover everything, right?
Something goes up against the electric fence, all the lights in the village
Yeah, you
dim.
might go
But
here
using
and get
Peter's
me,
farm
get me a
idea.
piece of wood for
Keeping of bees is again, that's one of these. It's a small thing, but it's come up over the last 10 years.
Bees and chickens.
Well, bees because of the pollination and the collapse of bees colonies worldwide, or at least North America, Europe, and a promotion of having more backyard beekeeping, and so a lot of bylaws don't permit it. And if you want to really, if you want to permit keeping of up to 2 hives, that's what normally. That would be the zoning approach, say, for residential type area.
Well, we have to be very careful because of bears, because we're also obligated
Yeah.
under our bear smart, whatever it is, which is not a bylaw, to not provide bear attractants. There are other bylaws around which you've seen about not putting your trash out too early. You're not allowed to attract wildlife. Chickens the same thing because of the coyotes. Even bird feeders is a problem because they attract rodents and
And bears.
On bears.
Rodents attract coyotes, so it's the same
But
thing.
the coyotes come for the rodents. The rats eating the stuff dropping on the ground. But okay, so that's a totally different topic. But it's all. I was going in the farm direction of Peter's. Can we forbid all farming uses?
I've seen it.
Okay, well, you don't have to answer that question now. So I think as far as this goes, as far as the cannabis, yes, but maybe we need more. And whether it's in
Yeah,
zoning or
maybe
not is another question.
Made a note of that.
Okay, so maybe we can have a sort of fairly blanket prohibition against any agricultural. It may actually give us more clout.
It probably would, because it's non-specific.
It's non-specific, you know.
Yeah.
But does that mean you can't have a vegetable garden in your backyard?
Okay, well
like
maybe you.
or the community garden.
Well, yeah, you could be.
Actually, I put community garden as a use permitted in any zone.
Thank you.
Uh,
8 complaints.
But yeah, you would exclude. I think you would exclude horticulture. The ones I've seen, I think, because I've been looking at lots of different bylaws, and some places they have for, so livestock or farm animals, mushroom growing,
Yeah, I
you
mean,
know, or, as examples, things like that. Like, but yeah, growing, having a backyard raspberry patch or something.
Okay.
Don't want to venture into trying to regulate that. I would say.
But if we are a residential community only, are we? Doesn't that exempt agricultural uses?
well, yeah. So, except can you
Well-
grow your own vegetables?
well, yeah, so
I
like,
certainly hope so, because I am.
My sunflower plant that creates sunflower seeds that's on my deck, is that agricultural? I mean, we get splitting hairs.
If it's
here.
just for your
Yeah.
own
For my
For my
consumption,
potted turnips,
if it's just for your own
All four of them.
consumption, it'd be
Those are-
residential, I would think,
yeah.
or auxiliary use to residential, or, but
Well, you can knock this off in your sleep.
Yeah,
so
Okay.
keeping chickens and things like that, any kind of animal keeping that would be farm type animals is pretty clear no. But growing, like having a garden is part of having a home. If you got a single family property with a lot in the backyard, having a garden plot, it's the scale of it and when does it cross a threshold.
Well, you need to consider that. So what about homing pigeons? You don't see a lot of people doing hobby homing pigeon stuff here, but you see it in other places. It's a pursuit where you take your homing pigeon far away and see if it can come back. Funny enough, they always do.
They do.
Anyway, okay,
yeah, let's move on.
good. So as far as it goes here, good. Yes. Maybe we need more. Let's move on to.
You're never going to make it to Squamish if you keep up
Well,
like that.
no, I'm watching. I've got 20 minutes. I'm good. Storage of industrial equipment and materials. So this one is good as well. I'm not going to speak first, although I've got some questions. So
I got
Fred.
some concerns about it. Let's see, A1I. Parking of vehicles of primary function other than transportation of passengers, including but not limited to dump trucks, forklifts, and so, is prohibited in all residential areas. I think the issue shouldn't be the blanket prohibition of those things. For example, I can think of 4 homes in our community that have micro backhoes.
yeah, bobcat type.
Yeah, and you could just hide them and they're not an objection to anybody. But when you start getting into the industrial size ones, I can see it being an issue. Just like
Although, you know, Fred, so I have a neighbour with a backhoe, a small bobcat. Yeah, it's okay. You know, it's a little sort of squamishy. Out in the non-RS1 Squamish, I mean. You know, do you allow that? And my question on that particular one is, what about boats, RVs, and horse trailers?
yeah, or how about tractors here? What's the difference between a lawn tractor,
Yeah,
somebody uses
you're-
to mow their lawn,
yeah.
versus a farm implement?
Yeah, in other words, is there somewhere else that is, a lot of communities ban the parking of RVs, for example, visible from the street. Do we? I thought we did,
We ban them parking on the street,
but not on the zoning
but not,
bylaw.
yeah.
It's on some other, I think on the highways bylaw.
Or parking, isn't it?
Parking, be traffic and parking.
And we built a parking spot for ours, and it goes right off onto our property.
Yeah, in theory, it's not, as far as I understand, it's not supposed to be visible from the street. And that's what I've seen on the highways bylaw. That's what people have been trying to enforce this construction equipment under. We can see it from the street type of thing. This is good as far as it goes, but does it need to go further? And I
Thing
also
is-
had a question just to Fred's point.
The-
Well,
the-
it's not to Fred's point.
The question is, how far do you go before you're starting to take away the rights of people who are legitimately, like, a lot of people do like to RV, and they own an RV, it's a big expense to put an RV somewhere else. And so, if they have a space on their property, they can put it on the property, then what's wrong with it?
Well, this is
I can
defining
see it.
what we mean by residential.
Yeah, but I can see, yeah, but it is residential. No matter how you look at it, it's residential. It's
A
not
lot of
commercial
places say
use.
it's not.
It's not commercial use.
Yeah, but that's
There's nothing in here about RVs.
well. That's what I'm saying. Should there
That's
be?
good.
Well,
What about boats?
this is addressing industrial
No,
and
this is
commercial.
industrial, commercial. I think Fred's point is fine with the backhoe. I mean, I suppose
I
you
mean-
could catch that off the weight or something like that.
This is a way to address specific situation. I recognize, but does it not need to be made satisfactorily broader in order not to be seen to be singling out a given situation.
Well, I would think that you could simplify it, saying up to a limit over a specific tonnage of such.
Well, that's,
Well,
what
it
I,
does.
that's
It says
kind of
on
where I said the weight thing, because I mean, somebody that's got a residential, or a heavy-duty residential lawnmower, a ride-on, or a backhoe like you've got, I mean, that's not gonna last long in commercial use.
No.
So is 4600, is that well chosen, Steve?
That's,
That's for the truck.
Yeah, but would that not incorporate everything?
there's, or a trailer. That's a, seems to be a threshold within BC commercial licensing branch whereby they require a different class.
What does a backhoe
or
weigh?
Use.
The front loader,
Well, a little Bobcat I don't think would weigh 4,600 pounds.
No.
kilograms.
I mean,
Yeah.
I wouldn't even think of a Bobcat as a backhoe, even if it's got a
Attachment.
backhoe thing on it.
Well, generally, these micro backhoes are usually about a ton.
Yeah,
That's about it.
Yeah.
Mm.
yeah, 1,000 kilograms. So it may be that just having the weight classification is enough, so that encompasses everything.
That's for commercial vehicles. Yeah, and I would,
And let's drop the commercial distinction, any vehicle.
Well, as far as the 4,600 kilograms is concerned, if somebody has a pickup truck with dual rear wheels, they can be licensed to about 5,000 kilograms, but it still can be used as a resident or a
Recreational vehicle?
yeah, and to have it joined with a trailer, if you're going to include the trailer in that 4,600 kilograms, I think you're way too low. I think you'd have to almost double it.
Well, again, I think the wider question is here, what do we mean when we say this is a residential area? Do we allow the storage of a whole bunch of stuff? There are gated communities in California where you're not allowed to keep your lawnmower
In sight.
So there's a spectrum, well, we're leaving at 7 o'clock tomorrow to this very the one you store your RV and your boat, in a yard, and yes, it costs money. It costs a lot of money because they don't want that stuff. So we are somewhere in the spectrum, and is this where we address it, Steve? I guess it is. This is to address a specific situation on your road, right?
It's got more to do than that. It's throughout the village.
Oh, well, of
Yeah,
course it's throughout.
there's other people in the village
Yeah.
that this will definitely affect.
So are you thinking perhaps about the car fixing places? There's two at least, but the one that's really egregious is the one on Cloudview, Soundview, I don't know. Would this cover that? Somebody running a body shop out of their home and parking the cars. The way they get around it is they're actually parking the cars on provincial land. But I would think that our zoning still applies, even if it's owned by the province.
yeah.
But I don't know if that includes people running a car shop, a body shop, or a car fixing place.
I don't think this catches that.
No, this is meant to
This is
specifically
this is
be-
light industrial.
Yeah,
And what about stockpile of material? I mean, you do say materials in here. Does that sufficiently cover gravel piles?
Rock, sand, that kind of thing.
yeah, construction materials.
Is that
bags of
means-
cement,
I would
to-
say commercial supply materials being versus commercial materials right there.
oh, yeah.
I mean, that covers your bags of cement, sand,
Yeah.
gravel,
Stacks of lumber.
and, yeah, that. I
pipe?
mean,
It
Yeah,
goes
so
on forever. Yeah.
that's, I mean.
That's all covered
I
by
don't have
that.
to defend this in court, but it seems to work for me, it's pretty clear. So, back to the issue that Fred pointed out, which is the hole in this, is what about the residential version of these industrial pieces? How do we get that out of this box? I'll leave it with you from my
Yeah.
standpoint.
Yeah.
I mean, because clearly,
It's got to be a size.
1,000-pound backhoe that Fred uses because his wife won't lift 600 pounds worth of plants anymore. Okay.
Do you have a backup?
Did I say that? I didn't say that.
Okay.
Well,
so,
currently it's allowed.
Oh, okay, yeah, I do.
okay, so
That's good to know.
Yeah, it's currently
Okay.
not. So I mean, I don't see that the same thing as a much bigger version, so.
Well, Steve, would you be able to do that using a weight thing, taking out the distinction whether it's commercial or residential use?
Well, actually, what I was just penciling in was right at the top of the page, the parking of, instead of just saying the parking of vehicles, you'd the parking of commercial or industrial vehicles. I was trying to set up by example by saying like dump trucks, forklifts, backhoes, tractors. Maybe that's where you're getting you got little mini ones to great big ones, but a dump truck, a forklift, a backhoe, to me, is sort of sets a class of, and so that something like a ride-em lawnmower wouldn't fit within that class.
We're not building a new swimming pool every second week.
Yeah.
No, you would
So-
have to then very carefully define industrial or commercial, right?
Well, there's a given, in a residential area, there's a given use, okay? If you've got a construction project going on, there's be a short-term period of time where
Oh,
you
that's
may
covered
have-
here.
Well, he's covered this
Yeah,
here
and
too.
that part's good.
Yeah.
Outside of that,
Well, I mean, Fred's point is good here, I mean, because you don't want to capture people that have got interesting toys.
Yeah.
I mean, and that they're not, okay, so that's what Steve could take care of. You were
Can
still
you, do you think
running.
so?
Well, clause
Well-
3 provides for an exemption to clause 1. You can have one up to 4,600 pounds, or kilograms. And that's kilograms, that's a lot of weight.
That's a lot of weight.
That's a big truck.
Or.
But why
That's
would
like
we
a
allow,
five- that's
why
like a
would we allow
5-ton
one?
truck.
Or backhoe, or exotic rock
That's not
crushing.
very residential.
No.
Because are we specifically talking about the residential zone here, Steve, or just general? This is not.
Yeah, residential.
So this would go into the definition of our RS1 or 2 or both.
that's the way my truck.
It would be under the general provisions of the bylaw, I think, wouldn't it?
That's where I was penciling it in.
Right.
Yeah,
So it would apply to all zones,
right after
wouldn't it?
parking.
Wouldn't it apply to all zones then?
It's
in the
prohibited,
general.
well, I've written it to prohibit it in residential
Okay.
zones,
Right.
but it's more than one zone.
Okay, but
Residential would be the townhouse and the RS1,
townhouse is a separate zone though.
yeah. So this would just be a general provision, general regulation in the bylaw.
Okay, well, I'd let you worry about the technicalities, whether it applies or doesn't apply. I mean, certainly we would want to, this would be contraindicated in the public works part of the village, which presumably has a zone.
Yeah, you're gonna have a,
So it can't apply generally.
I'm sorry?
But the public works has you have public works uses that are permitted in any zone, right?
Yeah, but whether you have works yard or not is something we haven't discussed at the staff level yet, how we're dealing with that.
I mean, even that, I would like council to have some sort of control. We can't have the thing look like a nuclear waste site. I mean, we can't just allow
Public works
any.
yard?
Yeah, it's got to look.
That's management's responsibility.
Well, you would say that about anything. Management being property owner as well. But
Yes,
as it turns out, people's places look like pigsties.
It's not for the zoning bylaw, though.
Well, if the public works yard's a problem, we just move it to the pit.
What I'm kind of hearing that council perhaps has a view that really are any of these things that don't really fit within a residential neighborhood. Why not just exclude them all, but just make sure that those things that you don't want to inadvertently exclude aren't, like an RV if it's parked on your property, or a bobcat if you want to do some puttering around your lot, or things of that nature. I think that's kind of the goal or objective that I'm hearing.
That's fine,
Is that
to the extent that
correct,
it
or-
doesn't conflict with other bylaws, because I know there's a provision somewhere where your RV and boat are not supposed to be visible from the highway.
I know the boat thing for sure, because my neighbors was ticketed for it, so, yeah. It's
So maybe that can
So,
be
but I'm not sure where it
superseded.
is in the
Well, I'm
package
hearing
here.
in the highways bylaw or parking bylaw. I
There's
don't know.
I
actually-
don't know, I mean, and clearly for Jim, something's gotta happen here, or guess what the first delegation's going to be, so,
Yeah, that's right.
you know.
Well, you guys can review your other bylaws too at some point if you want.
What do you mean, you guys? You mean I?
Well, he's innocently got his thing on on his property, and maybe it's complaining.
Okay, well, so let's before we put this one away, tell us about the explosive thing that seems to be part of this provision. You're saying that we can't actually prohibit the storage of explosives in Lions Bay.
No, that's what I'm saying.
Somebody's going to have to go and chain themselves to the door then, to make sure it doesn't.
Did you see the fireworks factory
think
in
so,
Mexico blowing up before we came down today?
Well, for example.
It's going everywhere.
But I think the corollary is that the federal government like tightly regulates this handling and storage of explosives and who gets permission to do it.
Hands up around the table who trusts the federal government. Okay, that's to get
No,
it
but
right.
they do. They've got legislation in place. We enforce it on work sites. It's
Yeah.
it's around. It's there. It's valid. There's all sorts of things that people may or may not be aware of. But there are very stringent rules
Yeah,
around that.
I'm sort of half joking, but the larger point is, so we can't actually regulate what the provincial feds do within our boundaries.
They have, where it's a core responsibility, no. If like when we get to the zoning of the ocean and the foreshore, that's a really good example of where there are little niches where you can regulate and not infringe on the federal jurisdiction. So that's where there's an opening, and it doesn't defeat the purpose of the federal law or the senior government legislation. You have some ability to regulate, but you have to be aware of where the limits are. So that's where, when we get into the blasting and the storage of explosives, I looked at a number of blasting bylaws. There are some municipalities who have blasting bylaws, and
We have one.
those are for notification of neighbors.
Yeah.
Basically, is what it's for.
Yeah.
And none of them mention storing, and it's because the feds they have exclusive jurisdiction.
Well,
there. So they-
storage and transportation of dangerous goods is
Yeah.
covered under dangerous goods. And there are some very stringent rules in there that many people aren't aware of. And how much you can store, where you can store it, all that kind of stuff, what kind of container it has to be in, and all that kind of stuff.
They actually have satellite monitoring as well.
There you go.
So this guy who asked to store up on the provincial lands at the gravel pit, pointing in the wrong direction.
He wanted to bring the federal guy with him. To
Yeah.
have
So
a
we
meeting on
actually
site.
don't have we have no ways to say no.
At this point, our way to say no is that the provincial guy I've been dealing with understands, and actually the blasting guy now also understands, that we want that area for our own use. It's a key element of our OCP, and therefore at the moment we are being, the blasting guy is looking elsewhere, and the province is waiting for us to move forward.
Well, that's more just by luck than by having the tools available.
No, it's through the skill of your CAO.
There's that too. Yeah. You don't
Is
mean
that
that
on?
you came.
Oh, sorry, that's on.
You came up with the use just in time. No, fair enough. Okay.
TikTok.
Okay. So any further input that you need there?
Question for me,
Yeah.
off the blowing up the place, to the clause 4, which is where a site has these vehicles, materials, and equipment on it, but they have a building permit of some description. The works manager gets to view the site and the equipment and see if it's necessary for the fulfillment of the construction of whatever the permit is. And then I'm a little confused whether it's removed within 20 days of final inspection. So if we've got a building permit that goes on for a couple of years and gets extended, so that means that the equipment can stay there for 3 years?
Or such earlier date as Public Works Manager determines such construction, etc., no longer needed to fulfill the scope of the applicable permit.
So if I'm theoretically got my big load of gravel, let's say there, and I'm
For your coming
cement work that's coming and all the rest of that, and
haven't started
there's
yet.
my big bobcat to
Yeah.
do it. The works manager is going to say, okay, do it in the next short time, or
Well, it's going to have to be a combination of this building permit, and soil and deposit removal.
Okay, that's fine with me.
It's actually a change to the building permit process? Because right now
well,
we can
we'll
have
have to-
infinite with renewals, right?
Yeah,
Well,
so,
that's where I was
we'll
going with
be-
this, given we just passed this, or we're about to pass the fines and the class phase tonight.
because of the new Building Act that the province has brought in, we will be having to look at a rewrite, basically, of our building bylaw in the new year.
So
So this will be something that will be amongst the many, many things that we'll be looking at
Yeah,
in the
fine.
building bylaw.
And so Peter and I have been talking about the building bylaw a lot in
Okay.
terms of modernizing our requirements. So this is one of multiple parts to address
Many issues.
issues.
Yeah,
Okay, fine.
Thank you.
And you believe that as far as the zoning bylaw goes, this piece here, part 4, is what's required in the zoning bylaw?
yeah, and it might require some tweaking still, and, I would probably, look at breaking this down a bit once it's in the bylaw in
Yeah.
terms of making it a little easier to read, but.
Steve, you know what we're talking about, right? The building permit process has been used in the past to keep projects open ad infinitum and justify storage of equipment at the project site. And so we're trying to address this, but not single anybody out, just to make absolutely sure that the use of a residential zone is consistent with what we mean by residential. And this is what we're trying to define here. Okay, so I think that gives us sufficient, and are we covered off for things like boats, trailers, horse trailers? I mean, I personally know two
I
people
think-
with very large horse trailers that I believe are,
They're permitted, I think.
well, one has asked for permission to park on the
Okay,
highway
so
and one has
why
not.
don't we just hand this one back?
Okay, so I mean, that's all pretty cut
Yeah,
and
you
dried,
got
I
a
think.
parking bylaw as well that deals with some of that stuff, right?
Yeah, okay.
Well, and I think you guys should give Jim the heads up on this so he knows before than later. I mean, if he's contravening, you should know as soon as possible.
Yeah, I don't even know.
So whenever you know, that's fine.
Oh, no, I don't think anybody's contravening right now. I think if your your appurtenance is parked off the
I
highway.
don't know.
There may be some visibility thing involved, but
I don't
I
know.
don't know.
I
Okay,
Let's give
let's
our
move
people
on.
some
Okay,
heads
I'm now sort of in negative territory, but I think we're doing well. So let's talk about zoning with the foreshore.
just mean you build a slat wall.
Now, you've all read this, I take it, Peter, does this take into account our discovery that we have jurisdiction up to 1,000 feet?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so even despite that, in our letters patent, we still have certain things that we restricted to do. The only real issue was, I know that we went through this in a zoning bylaw rewrite for the electoral area, which is just to the south of us, and that is that their zoning didn't allow construction of piers for docks, walkways.
So I'll let Steve speak to that, because he's looked into this somewhat.
And I think that it's automatic, it's precluded just by where we are. The fact that people, it's not gonna be viable for them to build docks and piers here because they're gonna get ripped out by the next winter storm that comes through.
That's exactly.
That's what
it.
I heard.
Yeah, and that's the fact.
Right.
And that's why we have a marina that takes everything out, because they can't do it, you can't even anchor a barge out there that would stop that weather. It's just really bad.
So
So-
if you had someone with unlimited resources who was gonna deal with it in some way, then you would want to do a rezoning, because it'd probably be impacting an entire neighborhood of waterfront with
But
very large.
every
lots.
single one that's been built has been torn down and allowed to rot because it just, as the weather pattern
Yeah.
changed, it got worse and it's just
Yeah.
not
I
viable.
think Steve's talking about the guy with the 300-foot yacht.
I know.
And
Yeah, so
unlimited
that's what they
money.
said on Bowen until the guy actually did it. And then it was too late, because he was in under the old zoning.
Yeah, well, what we discovered is that we do have zoning on the foreshore now. So that's something that when I started this project, I wasn't aware of, and I was just getting into rewriting the bylaw because, and as I was reading the bylaw, there's one of the zones, it reads actually like a rezoning bylaw. And it talks about areas north and south of Rundle Creek for the marina. And that being a dividing line for some reason. There's just some mysteries around the marina zoning. but there's a residential waterfront zone, and when you look at the context and read this zoning bylaw 362, you understand that it actually does have a residential waterfront zone that extends out. Well, I assume, I mean, that's the
Yeah, the M3, which isn't really defined in terms of how far out it goes or anything like that, but
it has zoning
it exists, and,
provisions, yeah.
and also the Brunswick Beach GVRD bylaw, right?
Yes, well, that one's on the map, and
But there's also other things that come into play, like the 1,000-foot zone is a good example. Okay, so we have a right to have bylaws and stuff like that out there to govern that, but the reality is under federal jurisdiction, a person has the right to have an anchor out there
yeah.
and use it. Now, we say, okay, nothing over 12 meters, or, whatever it is. But the thing is, and that's fine, but to prohibit the use of the anchors out there is pretty hard to do. So we got the sticky wicket situation with the houseboat. I think this pretty much covers it off quite nicely.
How does it actually cover the specific houseboat situation?
Well, it defines a houseboat. It precludes the fact that you can't anchor a houseboat out there. That's what it says, or a boat over 12 meters.
Yeah, and that's on a longer term
Yeah.
basis. So, yeah, I spoke with Transport Canada. They sent me their regs. I read a lot of their regulations, and so what you have permitted is a mooring system. That's what they call it, and that's just a buoy with cables. It's not attached to the land. They actually have a system of separation if they need to use it, like swing areas or something they call it. But that's basically all regulated through the Navigable Waters Act, or whatever the current name
And
is.
that's what directs us, what we put in our buoys and how we identify it and all that kind of stuff. Yeah.
And you can have a private one.
Yeah.
And that's what we basically allowed for in this zone. And also for temporary moorage up to 72 hours. So as far as a houseboat is a vessel. And so to actually prohibit, like completely prohibit houseboats is not possible, because as a vessel, you have to allow it to moor like any other boat on a short-term basis for a couple of days.
But then again, the particular one we're talking about had no means of propulsion.
Yeah.
It had been removed.
From what we understand, that makes it not a vessel.
Okay.
Right.
You're getting beyond me. Then.
Yeah. So what this will say is that you can moor your houseboat up to 3 days, 72 hours.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I would recommend, like Peter and I have had some discussion, you'd probably go as low as 48 hours, but you wouldn't go in all likelihood.
Now, what about the people who moor out there for 6 months? Why do they get a free ride? What's the distinction between houseboat and sailboat?
Well, no, but that's a right under the law
Navigation.
in Canada.
There's a right to put a
Right
moorage
the right to
system.
have
Yeah.
anchorage.
No, but we could prohibit anything longer than 48 hours if we wanted to. You can't trench on. So the core federal function is with respect to providing for moorage in an emergency, basically. Anything 48 hours or less, they would consider short term. We can prohibit long-term moorage, even to a private buoy.
I think you'd be contravening some of the federal.
No, you can have your mooring system, but you can't put your boat on it permanently.
There's cases that have been.
But so the question is, why can we exclude houseboats and not other kinds of boats?
Which is a very valid point, because up and down our little coast, there's everything from 12-footers to bigger, and then
Well-
here in this little cove we have our problem.
Well, I mean, that particular houseboat, is it shorter than 36 feet?
36, I would guess so. Was it?
Houseboat's a 40-footer.
Okay, well, it's pretty damn close to
okay.
12 meters,
Pretty
but
sure that was either 32
So
or
then
36.
It's a
Well,
40-footer.
let's
So
say
it
it
needs
is
to be
2/3 of
39.
that size, it's the same
just
thing.
over.
yeah. So my question is, how can we exclude houseboats and not other vessels? Because there's going to be other houseboats, and they are going to have means of propulsion, so they will be
Or
vessels.
it could be a derelict sailboat, a small one, could be the one you're trying to sell. There you go.
I'd be happy to get rid of it.
Well, I mean, the point is we want to allow-
Your bylaw is going
you could
to answer your
Airbnb
question,
it
your
as a
bylaw is
water
going to be
location.
weak on that point. It's
So, but it allows for long-term moorage of vessels under 12 meters. It allows for short-term moorage of pretty much any vessel.
If I was a houseboat, I'd come and say, you guys are discriminating against houseboats.
I would say that Carl's correct, because he is.
And on what basis are we doing that? And that's what I want to hear.
Because our experience has been that houseboats are a problem.
Okay,
Mine's not. Mine's very good.
It's Fred's small sailboat, the one he's trying to sell. It's not a houseboat anymore. It's less than 36 feet. It's that one. Imagine the scenario is all identical, except you take the word houseboat out of it.
Yeah, people are going to say, hang on a sec.
It doesn't have a motor that works either.
Mine's working fine.
It could.
It does have a motor.
It variably works. There you go. No, that's a good one.
That's a means. Doesn't mean it's
That's
actually
just
working.
mean. That's just mean. Okay, there you go.
Okay, so I'm hearing what you say. We're not quite there yet.
You got about a minute before you have to leave.
Yeah, I needed to leave. In fact, I'm going to leave now.
Well,
if I can let you guys,
carry on.
you boater guys, there's enough people here.
Well, Fred can take your mantle here.
So all I would say is that at some point this will go to the lawyers to review.
Yeah, that's true.
But they
So-
don't know. We have to give them the actual mechanism.
Yes, we have given them the
They've given
mechanism.
them
They will
stuff.
tell us.
I'm
if-
hearing our
pretty
consultant say it's
solid.
weak.
All right.
They'll tell us if this is the best we can do, or if we can tighten it up, or if we should change
I want him
something.
to tell us.
Yeah.
Okay.
he's the guy.
And what I'll do, because I took this definition, the Columbia Shuswap Regional District actually, with Shuswap Lake and the houseboating industry there, they have an entire zoning bylaw that all it does is cover the surface of Shuswap Lake and a few other lakes. So they have gone into this, and actually when I read the navigable waters, the literature they sent me, it didn't say Columbia Shuswap explicitly, but it talked about the regional district.
Yeah.
And so I'll give them a call.
Sure.
Rather than a lawyer, because I can get some, they've gone through all this, and they have a zoning bylaw, and they have a major houseboating industry there, and what it is, and it was West Kelowna was one of the court cases where people are parking a houseboat offshore and residing in it for an indefinite period of time. There are definitely can be some issues, and again, liveaboards you can't do anything about a liveaboard, as far as I know, but the flushing of sewage into the ocean is the number one issue. That you're not
That's
set
our
up.
issue, yeah.
Yeah, you're not set up
I
with
heard
any
they didn't
kind
have a
of
toilet.
But they hold it?
Yeah.
Apparently, I heard there's no
Well,
toilet.
it's in writing that you're correct, but
Yeah.
It's done. So you'd also look to Ladner or someplace to see like Canoe Pass or something where they have houseboat
I mean, the difference between
communities.
us and them is they want houseboats.
Yeah.
We don't want to single anybody out, obviously. And quite frankly, if a temporary houseboat wants to come and moor up here, great.
well, we don't want 4 more there this summer either.
Well, and that's the other. That is the issue. Does this also adequately? I'll ask this question, then I must go. Address derelict vessels. Is this the tool we use to remove derelict vessels?
That's a whole different ball of
Yeah.
wax. I think it's a very complicated area of law. So
Yeah, I know.
this is just your zoning bylaw, and unless you want to throw a whole bunch more money at Steve, then
Well, I know
Uh,
Bowen solved it and Seashell solved it. So
There's been a big lobby effort, the Howsound Community Forum, that's
Yeah.
where there's a lot of information.
yeah, well, I was
Sharing
involved
through-
in the federal. You know, the whole. Pam Goldsmith Jones just announced that they've
Yeah.
changed the federal regs. So I don't know that we're in the same situation we were even 3 weeks ago.
Somehow I don't think it's through zoning that it's done.
Okay.
So I think where we left this is you guys are going to finalize houseboat, liveaboard, sailboat length.
Yeah, and
And
this.
we'll leave that with you guys.
Yeah, it's not a matter of, Columbia Shuswap is part of their economy, but I think the question is where is their source of authority to actually regulate it? That's
That's what they've
the
provided.
question.
then
Yeah.
This wouldn't in any way limit our diving thing that we have out for the swimmers.
Our
That
little
would not be-
orifice at the
The
beach.
swim float?
Yes,
Yeah,
the swim
it's-
float, I'm just making
It's
sure that.
discussed in there very briefly. Permitted.
just final question on this topic is, assuming that this as written is enforceable, do you like 72 hours or 48 hours?
72
I think 72 a long weekend.
72 is reasonable.
Even longer I could go for. It's just not permanent.
Somebody gets
Seasonal.
stuck, 72 hours goes pretty fast.
Yeah, I was stuck at Gibson's for a lot longer than 72. I also I had a motor, but it was not operational.
You need sales.
Yeah, this one had no
He
sales.
gets paddled too, but that didn't happen.
Okay, are we good to close the meeting, or do you want to just have Fred take the chair and do it?
Well, what
I think
else we
we
got on the?
Do you have
We're
sufficient,
done?
Steve? You're looking like your head's spinning.
Well, no, not, we kind of left some things unresolved.
Yes.
But I think that, you know, to me, that doesn't concern me that much, because I think we do want, you know, there's always a risk, you know, showing up to a public meeting with a completed bylaw that it's a done deal, and it's not a done deal. A lot of the work that I'm doing is really housekeeping. So what I've come here and discussed over the last couple of meetings, those are the issues to be dealt with. And you know, as I've gone through this project, there's been lots of little cleanups in the bylaws that I've
Come along to the right, yeah.
And that's really the main purpose of, you know, one of the main purposes of the whole exercise is to get a workable bylaw in place.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, thank you, Steve. Thanks again.
This is
Good job.
This is the provision you were talking about. No boat exceeding 7 meters. It's just buried in this bylaw.
Okay, well, yeah. Fine.
The 12-meter one, and that's the feds. That's their threshold.
I mean, that's not a huge boat.
39 feet.
Yeah.
Yeah, 39 feet.
Mayor, I believe there's no reports.
Is that correct? And no new business, no public questions and comments, so I'll take a motion for adjournment. Second, all in favour, opposed, that carries.
Before you go, this is